Hello and a very warm welcome to Moneycontrol.com. On New Year's Day in 2021, nearly 67,000 babies were born across India, the highest number of births given anywhere in the world that day. It's a record-breaking number that has of course contributed to India now becoming the world's most populous country. It's also a development of a new phase for India. Will India be able to reimagine its strategies and policies to ensure that this population boom does not become a bane? We will have more people screaming for the same resources. Can India capitalize on this growing young population? To analyze this, to discuss this in greater detail, we are joined by two experts who have closely analyzed and worked on India's population trends and how they can work for India and what do they translate into for India. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Poonam Muttreja, Executive Director, Population Fund of India, and Rishi Agrawal, co-founder and CEO at TeamLease Regtech. Now, let me begin by asking you, Ms. Muttreja, on what was your first reaction when you heard? You've been, of course, analyzing India's population data for such a long time. How are you viewing this development?
So, first of all, it was expected. This is not a surprise. We knew we were going to overtake China. In fact, in 2027, which now we are overtaking in 2023. And the reason is that in China, population has declined rapidly. And last year, they had the highest number of decline in their population growth. It is no surprise, first of all. India has great demographic data. We've had for a very, very long time, thanks to our census, NFHS survey, and so on. So I do believe this is an opportunity for India to reimagine its development trajectory. And one way to do it is to invest in our young people, because India's population momentum will be fueled by a very large population of young people. In fact, 50% of our population is at a reproductive age. So even if they have one or two children, they are going to have, India's population is going to increase. But I also take heart in the fact that India's population has declined enormously over the last decades, and the work we have done over the last 50, 60 years in investing in family planning has given results, investing in education of girls, which there is still a gender gap and we need to work more. So this is the time we think of empowering our women to make choices, give them choices in terms of contraception, when they marry, how and how many children they have, if they marry, actually is what I should say. And we have invested very little in girls' employment opportunities, and the labor force participation rates are revealing at this point of time, especially for women. And finally, we have not planned for the possible demographic dividend. And this is the time for us to, in a mission mode, our Prime Minister is very fond of mission mode, and we have done well in the health sector in terms of bringing down maternal mortality, child mortality, and investing in family planning. So that mission mode has to be put in place across the geographies in India, especially the high fertility states. And India has made a beginning in that by Mission Parivar Vikas, which focused on 146 high fertility districts. We did well. And India is now expanding that in 7 states which continue to have high fertility, including several states in the Northeast. It's also time to think about how gender inequality, dealing with gender inequalities and women's empowerment is key. And education, not just at the lower level, but higher education and skills for our girls, and also increasing age at marriage. There is a lot that can be done. And we also need to improve our family planning services in terms of taking care of issues where women need counseling, women need management of side effects of contraceptives, because that's when they give up. When there are side effects, they give up contraceptives. But I am seeing this as an opportunity for India also. India is going to be well equipped if we skill our young people to for meeting the needs of the whole world, because there is a minus growth rate happening in many countries, developed countries, and also in some of our own states. For instance, Kerala has minus growth rates. There are states like Sikkim, which have minus growth rates, and we can distribute our skilled labor or skilled professionals, not just in India, but across the world.
Wow, fascinating. Ms. Muttreja, you raised several points in this. You talk about, this is an opportunity for India to empower its women, to ensure that there are better family planning policies in place that look at women empowerment. You talk about skilling of the youth. You talk about, this huge, window that India has right now to build on this. Let me bring in Rishi here. Rishi, just we've had these conversations in the past also on creating jobs and employment. If our population is expanding, while sequentially there has been a decline in the last few years, but we have the largest population in the world at the moment. It's a young population, which has its advantages, but we know that skilling is a problem. We know, it's very difficult to find employable people. We know that unemployment has been on a high, especially during the pandemic. So how are you see, what's your view on this, on this latest crown that India has is wearing?
Well, Shweta, thank you so much for having me on the show today. I feel that India is going to be a land of entrepreneurial opportunity in the next decade, and I consider myself lucky to be in India at this point in time. Just taking a quick look at the numbers, the world was at 1 billion people in 1804. It took 130 years to go from a billion people to 2 billion people. But in about 80 years since 1930, the population has gone up from 2 billion to about 7 billion, which was 2010. And the last billion got added in the last 12 years. So we can see that the last billion got added at 10 times the rate than the first billion that was added. Now, overlay the fact that the average life expectancy is growing. It was 68 years in 2001, 72 or 73 years in 2019, and is expected to be at 77 years in 2050. Now, why are these facts important? They're important because world is going to have more consumers than producers. If you look at the median life age in India right now is at 28 years versus 38 years for China and 48 years in Japan. The world will need more producers than consumers. So we have a very unique opportunity because we have over a billion people, 800 million of whom are connected to high-speed internet. We consume all kinds of digital products. There is a huge domestic demand that we have created. If a producer creates opportunities for Indian market or Indian consumers, chances are they are actually representative of the world demand, and they are producing goods and services for the world. So in the new world where reconfiguration of supply chains are happening, where people are looking for earlier a China plus one and a China minus strategy, India possesses a huge advantage, given that we can create mega factories which can not only work to satisfy its domestic demand, but also create for the global markets. So I think that's the opportunity at hand here.
Right, so we will come to what will it take for India to become a factory to the world. It's an ambition that we've stated often, and China plus one is, of course, adding to our advantage. But clearly, I mean, this number should set a timer. I think for the government, the alarm clock has already. I think it's already come off, and we need to act now. Ms. Muttreja, when we talk about family planning policies in place, India was one of the first countries to introduce a family planning policy. However, after that, because of political reasons, for decades, we've not seen governments being proactive about a family planning policy. And of course, the fact that women empowerment has not happened at the pace at ideally it should have happened across the country. It's happened in some states, but it could have worked better in some states in terms of, just access to contraceptives or education, which helps in controlling the population. So, one, I want to ask you, uh, is this the cutoff point for India? Like, can India go beyond the levels we have reached? Is now the time to be very structured and be very targeted in its approach? You mentioned that Prime Minister needs to be in mission mode. Should he be in mission mode on controlling the population, or to take advantage of this population demographic dividend?
So I think a combination of both, but more of the demographic dividend we want to invest in. And population control in India through a coercive method is not going to work. You just mentioned the political reasons where we didn't have a focus on family planning for a long time. I think emergency was a huge setback to population policies and programs in India, and also leadership on that. You don't need just programs, but you need to, in India, we are very good at making schemes, and whether the schemes work or not, it is not never measured. So we can be a very scheming society. I always say schemes out, but no impact. So what we really need to do is to accelerate the rate, given that we know without coercion, family planning works. Women in India, the national surveys show us, want not more than 1 point children, which means they want less than 2 children. But there is a huge unmet need for family planning for primarily 3 reasons. One, women don't have access to the family planning services that there are because of the social norms which don't give women the freedom to decide not only when they'll marry, who they'll marry, if they'll marry, but how many children they'll have and when they'll have. There's a pressure on a woman the minute she gets married. A young girl of 13 also has pressure to produce a child, and not one, but too many with very little spacing. So we need to educate our girls on the need for planning their families. And today, the other half knows how the better half lives. So the aspirations of a lot of girls and women have changed. So this unmet need for family planning requires greater freedom, empowerment, education, and opportunities to have a range of contraceptives. India, thanks to emergency again, because the government was not investing in family planning at the rate pace it should have, we didn't introduce a single new method for almost 30 years until 2017. And while the
Wow.
our neighboring countries had 8 or 9 methods. Now, with a young population, as both of us have said, needs different investments and a different focus. They need long lasting temporary methods. And India only introduced the first long lasting temporary method in 2017. And we have not put in, since you're given the channel, I'd like to talk about money. We didn't invest enough in spacing methods. India has one of the lowest rate of investment in health, and within health, 1.5 we barely reached of our GDP. While you look at the rest of the world, including our neighboring countries, which have slower economic growth, they have invested much more in family planning. Of our meager health budget, we invest 0.6% in family planning, and out of that, we invest 0.4%, which is really meager given our large population of young people, in temporary methods. So we need to step up the investment, financial investment, and the bureaucracy. And many politicians will tell you, but we aren't able to spend the money we have invested in the health and family planning budgets because of poor management. It is a market failure where the supply outstrips the demand. So that is the second reason we have such a high unmet need. And the
Right.
third is We have refused to invest in sexual reproductive health education as part of our health education, where young people know what the consequences are of unprotected sex. And the final problem is our men. Men have taken very little responsibility in terms of not just family planning, but the health of women, the consequences for their economic consequences for their own families, for the country, or for their families' future, to invest in food, education, health. And so we need a greater involvement of men, and we have very good policies, by the way, in place. There is a 2000 policy, which is excellent, but the states, because of political, I would like to use the word irrationalities, they are talking about the wrong thing to focus on, that we have high differentials between Hindus and Muslims. Muslim growth is growing fast. Well, all communities in India, population is declining. In the last 2 decades, the highest decline has been amongst the Muslims. And why? Because they're getting more education, they're getting, their women are getting more empowered, to a very small extent because of primarily the media. Now, what do we need to invest in is changing social norms, also around fertility, and providing more methods. India is yet to provide a very popular method for a long-lasting contraceptive called implant, where all a woman has to do is get an injection, and she can either get one for 3 years or 5 years and prevent pregnancies. But the problem is that the country still hasn't introduced it, and there is no rationale or reason for not introducing it.
Thank you, Ms. Muttreja. Very, very important and relevant points that you raised. You know, we haven't invested enough. We haven't moved fast enough. Honestly, as an Indian, it worries me to a degree that our population is expanding, which means there are more people waiting to access our healthcare, education, schools. So, Rishi, I'd like you to come in here on how does it pan out in our development trajectory? All these young people who are right now studying will ultimately go out into the market looking for jobs. What will it take to formalize, formalize the economy, to create jobs? Because right now, over 40% of our employment is still coming from agriculture. So for us to take advantage, and like you said, for us to become the factory to the world, which will mean higher per capita income, which will mean better spending on education, healthcare, better health outcomes, and so on and so forth. What does India really need at this point, and any good examples that India can follow? Ma'am, would you like some water? Would you like to take some water? Okay.
So, Shweta, hope is not a strategy. So while our Prime Minister calls it the Amrit Kal, and we have been enjoying the demographic dividend which started in 2006 and which will last another 35 years, we really need to take some bold actions here in order to become the factory to the world. Just hoping that we will be able to harvest the demographic dividend is not going to work. I quote the Nobel laureate Paul Romer, who said that the world is conditionally optimistic about India. And in order to end this conditionality, we must act boldly and quickly, because the economic status quo is not only immoral or wrong, but also unsustainable. Now, let's look at what does it take to create employment in India, right? If you look at 63 million enterprises which are there in the country, a vast majority of 62 million are still small and informal. They employ only between 2 and 3 people. They are not connected to any formal financial institutions. They have no access to equity or debt capital. They don't have access to domestic or international markets. They can't invest in technology. They don't have the wherewithal of doing R&D. As a result, while they are there as an enterprise, they are not economically very productive. We have created a large number of economic dwarfs over the last 75 years since independence. If you look at why that is the case, it is because it's easy to fly under the radar. Any company which is in the informal setup does not have to manage any compliance, because the moment you become formal, you deal with anywhere between 600 to 1,000 compliances. Indian employers deal with an ecosystem having 69,233 unique compliances subsumed under 1,536 unique acts and rules. There are 6,618 filings which are a part of this ecosystem. Now you scan this landscape further, and MSME, which manufactures only in one state, today deals with about 500 to 600 regulatory changes in the year. They deal with 5 different consultant types. They spend about 1 lakh rupee a month, and hence it's easier to stay small, stay dwarf, stay informal, fly under the radar rather than becoming job creators. And a lot of these, while we can call them enterprises, they are not really economically productive. And in order to get to economically productive, we need to do some bold reforms and make ease of doing business a reality.
Right, Mr. Agrawal, there are states, and we have a special desk now, a special department that's looking at that. So surely we've done some work in this. Can you outline, say, 5 key policy measures that you feel that we need to act on as soon as possible to ensure that to provide, to incentivize small businesses to go big, and to make it easier for startups to do business?
So, Shweta, a lot of them, and I congratulate the current government in order to do a lot. In fact, proof of the pudding is in eating. If you look at the number of times ease of doing business as a term is used in India today, it is mind-blowing. Whether it is legislative or it is executive, there are ease of doing business conversations that are happening all over the place. From having a handful of startups just a few years ago, India recently had 77,000 startups. We just celebrated our 100th unicorn earlier last year. So obviously, a lot is happening in the space. There is a convergence of land, labor, capital, and the fourth factor of production, which is entrepreneurship. So all of these things are definitely happening. Now, you asked me a very specific questions on 5 policy interventions that are required. Did we know that 30% of our acts, 47% of our compliances, and a whopping 68% of the criminality that is embedded in India's employer compliance comes from labor laws? In 2002, the second commission for labor was set up, which gave its findings. In 2019 and 20, the parliament passed the codes to modernize our labor laws, because a lot of these labor laws were written in colonial times.
Right.
Now, the world has changed. India has changed. The role of private sector in the country's development has transformed completely in the last 75 years. But if you look at the compliances that employers have to do, they haven't really changed. Still, there are jail terms. 2 out of 5 compliances in India have jail terms, which basically means that you are actually ready to put an employer in jail for creating jobs, for taking the risk, for putting his own capital at work. And as long as there is distrust and ingrained hostility in the Indian laws, an employer is not going to come forward and create jobs in the economy. So this hostility needs a change. The codification of labor laws is the step in the right direction, and I think the government should go ahead and take the next necessary action so that the 32,000 plus compliances which are embedded in this concurrent subject of the Constitution can at least be reduced to 50 to 70% or even more. Second, the rationalization is required where all compliances, where there are redundancies, overlaps, and duplications must go. Indian employers in 21st century does not need microscopic prescriptions for putting spittoons and various kinds of urinals and the number of urinals and the temperature of the cooling water, the quantity of the cooling water, the source of the cooling water. All of these things were required in 1948. In the 21st century India, where entrepreneurs are fighting in the market for open talent, do we really need these microscopic prescriptions? So all of these are important areas. Government is already moving the needle on digitization. We need to continue to do that towards a national open compliance grid, where with a click of the button, you can actually create a compliance document, and with another click, you can actually file it with a regulator without having a need to go onto websites, log in, or do any paper-based filings. While the reform of 1991 put the license Raj in a museum, the inspector Raj is still prominent. There are at least 20 inspectors which can show up at a company at any point in time and inspect their registers and returns. My request is we need to start investigating, scrutinizing all of them, and figure out how do we move towards a paperless, presence-less, and cashless infrastructure of compliance in the country.
Okay, so you're saying labor laws, you're saying rationalization of compliances, and what's the third point that you mentioned?
So I spoke about a few, but one thing that I do want to add to the list is decriminalization. Already a Jan Vishwas bill was tabled in the parliament in the recent session, where there is a provision to start decriminalizing a number of labor laws, and not just labor laws. I'm saying number of laws in 42 different acts, so that all the irrational punishments that have been embedded into the employer compliance can be brought down.
Mhm. Um, that's a tall agenda that you've set for the government, Rishi, and I do hope that they take it in all seriousness. Let me come back to you, Ms. Muttreja. You mentioned that in terms of our population graph, there has been a decrease across all religions. Can you just take us through some of the trends that we have seen in India's population in terms of the number of younger people now that are forming in the population mix? When will India start aging? And in terms of population trends across religions that you alluded to.
So India will stabilize. We have had a huge decline, but the stabilization will happen some point around 2048. And that's something we can accelerate, but nevertheless, we will have an increase till then. And in fact, by 2100, we will have minus growth rates in India. And as far as aging, the process has already begun in India, in spite of a very large population, a youth population, because, as was said earlier, longevity is increasing. So given that, we do already have a reasonably high proportion of aged. By 2070, we are going to see a situation where the age ratio between young and old is going to be very imbalanced. So India has to start preparing for social security, health security of the aged in India. India has literally very little security, and we also have to start investing in the care economy. Care for the aged, care for the young. I mean, one of the biggest impediments for women to leave the workforce or not join the workforce is the caregiving role that women have of not just their children, the in-laws, the husband, anybody who needs care. It is the women who ultimately end up giving being part of the care economy. So India's trajectory has been that we've had high population growth amongst those who are not literate, who are poor, with whichever community it may be. So there is no such thing called Hindu growth rate or Muslim growth rate or Christian growth rate. If you look at the population numbers and the demographic data, it has to do with parity for education, as I said earlier, and incomes. So what is happening is that with incomes increasing, with literacy increasing across all communities, though we had very, very low income levels and education amongst the Muslims in the first 3 or 4 decades, they have caught up. So now they're catching up with fertility rates too. So in the last 2 decades, we had a decrease. Plus, there are empowerment issues or freedom issues where non-Muslim women could get much easily sterilization. And sterilization is the main family planning method in India, and it continues to be.
Sure.
What happens is, the interesting data behind these numbers is that 77% of the 58% of women who go through sterilization have never had a family planning method they have experienced. And this is 77%. So which means what has been happening in the meantime is either they've been having multiple abortions, or they've been having more children than they wish to have, or they can afford to have, plan to have. Finally, in the last decade, apart from investments by government in the family planning programs and new methods, I'd like to say that the investment in focused, targeted communities where there's high fertility rates across, as I said earlier, 147 districts was successful because the needs of the women in those communities was taken care of in terms of family planning services. The market stabilized for them, and the supply was increased. Third, in India, what has been happening is that we have had very little investments by the private sector in family planning. So in the urban areas, normally where you see fertility decline faster in other countries, we did not see it in India. Public sector has been the main provider of family planning services. And in India, when we talk about family planning, everyone has called it a problem without looking at solutions. We keep on saying China was the answer. Thank God China has publicly now transparently declared to the world that it did not work, that they had extreme minus growth rates, sex ratios declined at a very fast stage. And China is a country which has a son preference, but India is a country where we have not only son preference, but we also have, if I may say, daughter aversion for economic, financial security, different reasons. And so therefore, what has happened is that you cannot have policies that are coercive. And India has been talking mostly about coercive population policies. Thank God for our bureaucracy. Our bureaucracy, I find in the health sector, is very well informed, whether it is at the center or at the state level, are very well informed on the need for family planning, stabilization, etc. And they have resisted the political pressure very well in framing good population policies. And I think the voice of civil society has also been very strong. And the media needs to actually ally with having the right information and spreading it out, because there are too many myths and misconceptions on family planning. Now, I want to come back to the men, which I raised earlier. Do you know what the rates of sterilization amongst men in India is? 0.3%, which shows the lack of responsibility and an obsession with their virility. They think there is this misconception that sterilization reduces virility. And we need to step up on these stupid issues that we have been focusing on and the wrong issues. It is time that we prioritize stabilizing population. We prioritize on ending unsustainable patterns of production and consumption. It is going to be essential for India as a country with large numbers to show the world that we can become an economic power. We can be the factory for the world, but with sustainable growth patterns. So that is the big challenge that I would throw to the government in the context of India's economic growth. And finally, we have to put young people at the center of our future programs, planning policy, whether it's economic policy, whether it is education, health, and nutrition. We cannot progress if 53% of our young people are anemic. And I do have reasons to believe this government is worried. But again, we do a lot of talking, and this is not just this government. India and China, the big difference is that we make policies, we keep repeating the right things often, but we don't follow it by implementation. So just policies is not enough. India has excellent policies. We need to do the implementation and prioritizing.
Well, very quickly now, to sum up this conversation, my question is to both of you, Rishi and Ms. Poonam, on what are the lessons that we need to learn from China in this? What are the mistakes that we need to avoid? And what are the positives that we can learn from the China story?
Well, I don't want to compare India to China, Shweta. We are two different nations, two different socio-economic, political backgrounds, but there are clear lessons in general. One of the key lessons is that we need to take some bold policy reform actions in order to reduce the regulatory cholesterol, which has blocked the convergence of land, labor, and capital in the country in the last 75 plus years. We also need to do a lot of work in reducing Inspector Raj, reducing the hostility that is ingrained in India's regulatory ecosystem. We need to create incentives for informal employers to go formal by reducing the compliance burden that actually becomes rampant the moment a company goes from informal to formal. All of these will create an environment which is an enabling environment to promote entrepreneurship in the country, take a number of these informal employers and make them formal employers. And just to give you an example, if we convert as a country 1 million informal employers into formal employers, the country would have created at least 20 million new formal jobs. And I think these are examples of things that we can do at the grassroots level to promote entrepreneurship by improving the ease of doing business and reducing the regulatory cholesterol.
So China's reduction in population is a big learning for India, and not only what to do, but what not to do. So what not to do, I'll come to first. India, as I said earlier, is a democracy. Coercion will not work, but coercion is not needed. Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh have shown to us by investing in education, better governance of the health system, and development programs, they have brought down their population growth drastically. And in Kerala, as I said, it's completely under 1.6 the population growth now, which means that we have surpassed replacement levels and we have minus growth rates. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should have minus growth rates as a strategy, but it'll happen anyway. And that's another lesson from China, that it can happen very quickly if we do the right investments. Second, from these states as well as China and a few other countries, what we have to learn is that you have to, for economic and all other development to take place, you have to invest first in better, in improving and enhancing your development programs, but also the infrastructure and regulation. So the regulation to have a 2-child norm would be the biggest mistake India does, and it may be a setback to our country. So we absolutely have to stop even talking about it, and we have to change the mindset of not just our political leadership, and I'm not referring to Mr. Modi, who talked about voluntary family planning in August, from the Red Fort on 15th of August, but the majority of the people's population in India also believes we need coercive policies. And finally, from China, what we have to learn is that we have to keep monitoring and evaluating our programs. And in India, we have not monitored our programs. So how to improve and evaluate our programs, we must do. And finally, put women and young people at the center with greater participation with men. I am not saying we leave out the men, but our men need to, in this sector, play a more responsible role.
Well, with that, we come to a close to this conversation, which has been very, very insightful. So the clear takeaways are that the government will have to act fast, and so would the private sector, for India to capitalize and build on this opportunity. We need to create jobs. We need to simplify ease of doing business. We need to incentivize businesses to go big so that jobs are created. We need to be very aggressive on our skilling initiative. Most importantly, India needs to reorient its family control policies to ensure that they are not coercive, to ensure that they are driven by women empowerment. Because as Ms. Poonam Muttreja pointed out, when women are educated, when they have access to contraceptives and better healthcare, birth rate declines. So that's very, very important. And of course, one startling revelation that's come out is that a lot of work that's gone in this space has been driven by public expenditure. The private sector has taken somewhat of a backseat when it comes to providing women and men with options to control birth rate and to ensure that families are planned well. So we do hope that India is able to take advantage of this population explosion, else it will become a huge burden for India. Thank you so much for watching.